Good evening all and welcome to day 4 of the birthday week bonanza with new stories every day. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories from the brave men and women of the armed forces. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. The first time I was in module confidence training at Camp Lejeune, they always said that this one area of the woods was haunted, and I was like, oh, yeah right. So me and this one other dude had to take the trash out late one night, and he was too scared to walk in the woods, so I do it. As I'm tossing the bags over, I distinctly hear footsteps in a puddle right behind me. I figured it was the other dude, but no one was there when I turned around. It was a sizable clearing and there were no animals around either. I asked the guy about it, but he basically said screw this and ran off. Another time, when I was in Okinawa, everyone in my unit was convinced our barracks were haunted by some old guys from World War II. On a side note, superstition is taken very seriously by the locals there, and they've been known to halt construction on buildings and not man posts because of ghosts. Anyway, I wake up to a slight earthquake one night, which is normal, but I notice that none of my model gun dams are rocking like they usually do, especially when the room feels like it's rocking that hard. I said screw it and tried to go back to sleep. I started feeling footsteps on my bed, like a cat was walking over it. Now I'm scared because so many people in my shop have personal ghost stories, and I've had no explanation for this one. I don't know if it's a demon or something. I chose not to open my eyes and count to 3, and when I'd finished counting, opened them. But when I opened my eyes, there was nothing there at all. It's not something I can explain away. By giving you some necessary background information. It was mid-February at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, freezing cold outside. The old tents that we were in had giant door flaps at each end that would fly open because of the crazy amount of wind. So all night the flaps would open a second at a time and let a decent amount of light from the floodlights they had set up between the tents, and then quickly close again. We were in a 60-foot-long general person tent with rows of cots lining the walls on each side, and a single narrow walkway down the middle. The cots were set up alternate stacked, so there was a cot across from you if you were standing in your walkway. There was a rule that any time a drill sergeant walked into the tent, someone had to call at ease and everyone would come to attention at the foot of their cot, facing the aisle of the tent. At around 10 PM I had just come off a 2-hour guard shift at the top of a makeshift guard tower. We had about 100 feet from the tents. It was cold, and the wind was typical of about 20 to 25 miles an hour for Oklahoma wind. So it was mind-numbingly cold and miserable on my guard shift. So I had decided to use my full cold weather sleep system, sleeping bag, which requires you to zip yourself in to get warm. This wasn't a good thing to use in basic training because it made it more difficult to hear and impossible to see what was going on around you. But getting warm was the only thing I cared about that night. I told my bunkmate that I was zipping up and asked him to unzip me in the morning or if anything happened, and proceeded to fall asleep. I was jolted wide awake by a sound that's hard to describe, but it was a mixture of a quick boom and an extremely loud zipper. I lay there in my sleeping bag for a second, trying to see if I could hear anything and trying to figure out what in the world just woke me up. I had an uneasy feeling, so I partially unzipped the bag and poked my head out and thought I saw my bunkmate standing next to his cot. But I wasn't 100% sure because it was so dark. I kinda whispered to him, "What's going on, man?" but didn't get a reply. Suddenly the wind blew the door open and the light from the outside showed me that everyone was standing to attention in uniform. I immediately was scared and flustered because I'm thinking the drill sergeant is in the tent, I'm not dressed and have no idea what's going on, and my bunkmate didn't wake me. I jump out of my cot, throw on my uniform in less than 20 seconds and get to attention at the end of my cot. As my eyes are adjusting to the darkness, I can see the silhouette of the soldiers in my peripheral vision as I stared forward, but no one's moving or making any sound. After what seems like a minute or two of standing at attention, I kind of side look at my bunkmate standing at the end of his cot, and tried to whisper to him angrily why he didn't wake me up, and what the hell's going on, but he didn't reply. I continued looking ahead and clearly see bodies in uniforms of the guys standing across from me. I look over at my bunkmate to ask him again what's going on, and can see his silhouette clearly, when all of a sudden the tent flaps open, light comes in and there's suddenly no one there. As I'm processing what just happened, another immediate thought hits me. The guys across from me very clearly are wearing BDU. We were one of the first in basic training units to be issued ACU, which is digital camo. I look back at them and there's no one there. Suddenly I realize I'm standing there alone and everyone else is in the cots sound asleep, and the deepest, spine-tingling cold washed across my body like I'd never felt before. I get back into my sleeping bag and wonder if I'm losing my mind, and pretty quickly fall back asleep. The next morning, as we're getting food in line, I was telling someone what happened when a drill sergeant overhears me and pulls me out of line with a "Come here, private." I run over to him, instinctively thinking I'm in huge trouble. Drill sergeants never talk to you, and if they do, it's no good. He has me follow him to the table where all the drill sergeants are sitting. This is the scariest place in the world to an 18-year-old in basic training. He tells me to tell the story about what happened last night. I'm nervous as hell because they're all staring at me, and I think I'm going to get kicked out for psych. As I'm telling them, they start looking at each other with these huge grins and shaking their heads. Once I finish, the senior drill sergeant stares at me for a second and then asks what the colour of the uniforms were. When I say BDU fatigues, everyone at the table reacts with the same damn whistles and little laughs. The senior drill sergeant then grins and says, "Congratulations, Private. Every single cycle when we come out here, we have one person who sees them. The tree right outside your tent was the location where a stray shell hit a platoon of trainees in the 80s and killed several of them. Normally at the end of the cycle, we pull everyone together and ask if anyone has any ghost stories. One person always tells this one, and they're always wearing BDUs. Now go eat, Private." Then I walked away, ate, and proceeded to be nicknamed Ghostbuster by the drill sergeant for the rest of the cycle. This was in 2007. I just retired as a first sergeant and can still vividly remember every single detail of that experience. I didn't really believe in ghosts up until that moment. Since then, I have no doubt that there is some force around us we still don't understand, especially if they could have the power to pick and choose who they let see. Only one per cycle, is it? It's quite amazing, really. Part of me feels like they helped me through basic training. At the end of basic training, we have to complete a 12-mile release ruck, not in formation, that starts at 10 p.m. and takes you till about 6 or 7 a.m. to finish. I rolled my ankle midway through and had to slow down to the point where I was absolutely by myself for a long time. I couldn't even see the chem lights anymore, and the more I walked, the less I was able to walk, until I was at the point of absolute pain and exhaustion. At some point during the march, I blacked out, and went from being on a random dark road in the middle of nowhere to all of a sudden walking out of the wood line and being next to my barrack with no recollection of how I got there. I ended up being one of the first people to make it back to the barrack, even though I know for a fact I had fallen behind and had been passed by people who ended up coming after me. Overall, it was a pretty strange experience, and the 15 years since have been mostly uneventful, with the exception of the haunted house me and my wife lived on at Fort Hood. I was in Fort Still for basic training. Every night we took turns doing fire guard. That's basically where 2 soldiers rotate every hour to watch the door and make sure everyone stays in bed. There were 4 barrack bays. Ours, the female bay, was upstairs and across the hall from the male bay, but we used separate stairwells, so us females and drill sergeants were the only ones using this center stairwell. The drill sergeants would come up to check on us periodically. The doors were heavy and loud, and we could hear when they went into the bay across the hall. So every now and then we would hear footsteps come up all the way to the stairs and stop. Neither of the doors would open, and we'd never hear them go back down. We even heard objects roll down the stairs. You could hear them hitting every individual step as they went down. It was quite scary. After lights out, everyone had to stay in bed. We had to let the fire guard know if we were getting up to go to the bathroom, and no showering was allowed after that time. There were times we would hear people talking in the bathroom in the middle of the night, and sometimes hear the showers going. So we would go look, because we would all get into trouble if anyone was up making noise, but no one would ever be there. I should also mention, the lights are motion sensed, so we would walk in and the lights would turn on, meaning a physical person hadn't been walking there for at least a few minutes. Our beds were all in rows and lined up, and one night we all got woken up by a scream right next to our row of beds. All of us sat up at the same time, freaking out and looking at each other. We couldn't figure out where it came from. In 2019, I was in Fort Pickett at our annual summer training. We were in the field, which is basically like camping in tents. There was a large open field where the medical tent was, and then our personal tents were in the back of the tree line. There were a few nights where people were woken up by something shaking their tent, whispering their names or vivid nightmares. Some even saw figures standing outside their tents. Some people had dreams where they woke up to only be in another dream. I was with another sergeant in a 2-person tent, far off from the edge of the group. One night I heard footsteps all around our tent, almost circling it, as if a whole platoon was walking past us slowly. But our medical area was so far away from all of the other training areas, as far as I knew, no one was out training at 2 a.m. that day. The entire place was infested with spiders. When we first got there, we went into the woods to set up our sleeping tents, and within 5 minutes there were 6 spiders crawling out on my pant leg. Definitely not my favorite annual training. My ex also shared a story about Fort Indiantown Gap. He used to tell me that while he was sleeping, he saw a man or figures standing next to the bed or in the corners of the room. He often saw a man with a moustache. I don't know who it could have been, but anyway, fast forward to another annual training. We had some free time one day, and most of us decided to go back and take naps in the barracks. The girl in the bunk next to me was asleep for about an hour when she woke up and asked me if she had been screaming. I said no, that she hadn't said anything the whole time and that she was just sleeping. She said she just had sleep paralysis and thought she was awake. In her awake dream, she was in the same barracks with all of us, but we were all staring at her. But the thing that got me is she said there was a man with a moustache standing right next to my bed. He was bent over and the only person that was looking at me instead of her. She's a complete skeptic, and I've never told her about what my ex saw too. We were doing land navigation at Fort Benning Infantry 1 Station Unit training. The site is called Uniform 3-5. During the group night iteration, we're booking it back after finding our last point because we're about 1.5 kilometers out and we've got 18 minutes left or something to make time. In what felt like an instant, it went from slight twilight visibility to near pitch darkness. Before I continue, meet the 4 people in my group. The first is a socially awkward weirdo. He's annoying as hell under nearly all circumstances, but for a land navigator he really came in handy because I'd plot the points and have him dead reckon run in a straight line like Forrest Gump right through trees, terrain and bush. He'd come back to us, whisper shouting, "Hey guys, I got the grid numbers," with banana spiders crawling all over his patrol cap and eye protection. The second is a kid from Guyana, soft-spoken, if he ever spoke at all. Couldn't shoot or land navigate worth a damn, so he just followed everyone else hoping we knew what we were doing so he would get by. This dude literally negligently discharged 3 times into the ground at the range right next to his foot. The drill sergeant didn't notice. I removed myself from his lane because I'm not getting shot at basic training. 3 was our premier sick call ranger. Dude always had problems. He was our first tink-tink, term for guys with crutches because of the metal sounds they make, and then had back problems. For land nav it was his groin. Then there was me, the 29-year-old former teacher with a master's degree who enlisted because he wanted to experience life before becoming an officer. I quickly realized because my peers were mostly 18 and 19-year-olds, with plenty of baggage of their own, army life wasn't going to be easy as an enlisted soldier. The whole time during the night land navigation portion, we'd been hearing boars squealing in the distance, so we were on edge given how dark it was outside. I find a perfect piece of broken branch on the ground shaped like a pistol with the barrel end sharpened to a point, so I might be able to stab the boar at least once before I'm gored to death. So we're running down on a hardball road. Forrest is running up front, back arched, chin to the sky, looking for a turn-in to the woodline so we can head back to the starting point. Guyana is trying to keep up, but he's always been one bad thought away from quitting every time some small degree of cardio was required from him. I wanted to run up with him or Gump, but sick call ranger is crying and lagging behind because of his groin. Me being the platoon guide, student leader in charge of the whole platoon, would look really bad if I left someone behind, so I brought in the rear. Forrest finds the dirt path, and from there it's a straight shot for 1 kilometer to the safe point. As we're running along, I can barely make out the 3 guys ahead of me in the darkness. Moonlight is struggling just to peek through the canopy above, and the 3 guys in front are just dark silhouettes against a dark, blue-hued forest. I'm hugging the left side of the path since we're curving to the left, when from the corner of my eye, I swear I see something humanoid standing against a tree trunk. It's so dark it's hard to tell if there's any physical presence or if it's just the tree bark itself. As I pass by, it lurches out at me from the edge of the path, like a dude hiding in a Halloween decoration trying to scare the kids. Just a black human-like shape. I flinch towards the center of the path and look back, unable to see what had just motioned towards me. I think to myself, we've been out here all day. I'm tired. Must be my mind playing tricks on me. After the path straightens out, I see Forrest up ahead, flail around and nearly fall over. From 25 to 35 meters behind, I hear him just go, "Ah!" But he gathers himself and keeps running in true Gump fashion. After we get back to the safe point and turned in our land nav cards just to sate my own curiosity, I saw you almost get wiped out back there, expecting him to acknowledge it. Well, something reached out at me, but I didn't want to stop because we were pressed for time. I hadn't told him about what happened to me just moments before his apparent encounter. He just brought it up, unsolicited. I had always read stories of Confederate apparitions at military bases or Civil War battlefield sites. I can't say for sure this was something like that, but Fort Benning is named after a Confederate general. Regardless, I never thought I would experience something this strange in my life, let alone in a dark forest in the American South. I'm pulling law enforcement patrol in Area 5 of Fort Lewis, which is the range area. It's mostly quiet and a great way to sham your shift if you can get it. The only problem is if you want to grab snacks or drinks, you gotta drive up Eastgate Road / Stryker Avenue, and then it's a right on the 41st Division to the other side of the post to get to the nearest Chapette. The only other way at the time was across from Madigan, but on the Eastgate Road you would pass the post cemetery heading to and from the range area. So one night just after sundown, my partner and I decide to grab something to snack on and start heading towards the shopette. As we're getting near the cemetery, one of the DA civilian traffic cops is on the radio conducting a traffic stop. Nothing unusual, but as he's actively speaking, a little girl's voice comes over the radio, louder and clearer than his comms. "Can anyone hear me?" I look over at my partner, and she's giving me the "what the actual hell was that" face, and I floor it out of the cemetery. If you look on Google Maps, the cemetery is at the end of a very long driveway and surrounded by trees, but what you can't see is that there's a small parking lot. It makes for the perfect hiding spot if it's a quiet night, or just need a smoke break away from everyone. So naturally we have 2 patrol cars sitting there one night, just talking. My team leader starts on about how haunted the base is, and of course I say BS, and he goes, "Oh yeah? Go ahead and stand by that flagpole for 10 minutes. Now the flagpole is at the center of the cemetery, and it's probably 2 in the morning. As a cock-strong private too, I said too easy, and I go walk in the dark-ass cemetery towards the flagpole. Nothing remarkable happens. I hear a train in the distance, but nothing else. I come back after 10 minutes. "See? This place isn't haunted." "Yeah, did you hear anything?" I told him just the train and that was it. Those tracks nearby have been out of service for 30 years. It could have been BS, but that was just kind of like an "oh snap" moment. Another night in the cemetery, a couple of patrols were sitting in the parking lot again. One sergeant is taking a quick cat nap, as the other 3 are smoking and talking to pass the time. Well, the car with the guy sleeping in it begins to start honking and flashing its lights randomly for about 30 seconds, but one guy always carried his digital camera with him to let you know how long ago this was. So he started circling the car as it was going off, taking picture after picture. After he stopped, he started to go through the pictures he took. Nothing until the last few. One appeared to be a human-shaped figure of smoke that wasn't there in the other pictures, but the last one was clearly a hooded woman, able to discern facial features standing on the other side of this patrol car. I wasn't there that night, but my roommate was the one taking the pictures, and he showed them to me when he got off duty, right off the camera as he came in. There's no way he would have been able to edit the pictures like that. This next one's short, but we would regularly respond to alarms being tripped in the museum on post. One guy in my company said he saw a shadow walk by a window, and upon search didn't find anyone. It was definitely something that left a lasting impression on him. This is a story from when I was a young private, first class, doing barrack checks while guarding at 9 p.m. I was right outside the female barracks. The way these buildings are set up are that there are rooms inside the building where there is an indoor staircase. There are also rooms with an outside staircase which are out in the open, so you can see people walking in and out of each hall or up and down the stairs. The only non-visible part is literally the arch they walk through to get to the stairs. Anyway, I'm doing my checks and I see some girl in a hoodie standing in the dark, which isn't weird as the laundry was right around the corner on the ground floor. Then I see her walk through the arch, but she completely disappeared. She didn't go up the stairs, she didn't walk towards the laundry. The only other place she could have gone is a tiny closet where they keep the water heaters, which only the Department of Public Work personnel has access to. But even then the door was visible to me. It was still pretty early on and I was wide awake. And this was a few yards away from me, so it wasn't a trick of the light. I told my senior officer about it and he told me it wasn't surprising because there was a lot of creepy stuff that happened in those barracks, since they were the oldest one on the installation. Something else that happened to me in the same barrack was the random voice I heard coming from my roommate's room. I came back early from work and I clearly heard a girl talking in there, giggling and stuff. I assumed it was her. 2 hours later I heard the front door unlock, and in she comes. Turns out she'd been out all day. When I tell her that I just heard someone in her room, she freaks out, because we think someone might have snuck in there. She goes to unlock the door, but before she opens it, we both hear a loud-ass jiggle coming from the room. When we open it, ready to apprehend someone, we see it's empty. The crazy part, we told ourselves that it could have been from across the wall or something, but that's not possible, because everyone was on block leave, and we were about 2 of the 5 females in the building that started behind. The other ones lived either on the opposite side of the building or a few floors upstairs. That building itself was creepy as hell, and I'm glad that I'm not there anymore. I was at Camp Bonsteel in Kosovo for about 9 months. When we got there, some of us heard a story about a giant rabbit that had been seen off base a few times, outside the base perimeter. We all laughed it off. A few months later, I got up at around 2 AM to use the latrine. As I'm walking outside, I looked off into the distance, and I swear I saw a rabbit about 6 feet tall. It was standing still and didn't move. I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, it was gone. I told my buddies, and they all laughed at me. To this day, I'm still not sure if I actually saw it or not. My dad was in the Navy for 20 years, and I was alive for the last 13 of those. Normally, military families, at least for the US military, travel around a lot, and it's not unusual for a family to be uprooted every 2 or 3 years. I was lucky in that after my parents got married, my dad was stationed in Virginia in 1993, where both my younger sister in 1995 and myself in 1993 were born. Shortly after my sister's birth in 1996, we moved to North Florida and have been there ever since. We even lived in the same on-base house for a decade, 1997 to 2007, when my dad retired. Needless to say, we grew up used to friends coming and going depending on their parents' duty station, while we oddly didn't go anywhere. The way the base was set up was that 2 houses were connected and went 123 street name A, 123 street name B. The house my family lived in was B, and in the early 2000s a family of 4 moved into house A. I was in kindergarten and 1st grade at the time, so I was at that age where I don't quite understand the idea of divorce and remarriage. The family that moved next door was a blended family in several ways. The husband was black, the wife white. The daughter/stepdaughter was white, and the 3-year-old was mixed. I remember this was super confusing for me because I didn't understand how the daughter was white, not realizing she had a different dad. He had a brother in the area, so his niece would come over, and she was over so often I thought she lived there, which only added to my young mind's confusion. Anyway, apparently they weren't very good neighbours. They'd have house parties at all hours and pound on the walls, which my mum reported to housing. She told me and my sister to never go into their house, and I had no idea as to why. I did, however, go into the house once for some reason, which stuck in my memory. I had been playing a weird kind of catch with the 2-year-old who wasn't allowed outside, and I wasn't allowed inside. So he stood in the doorway and I stood in their covered driveway throwing a ball back and forth. Eventually the ball went somewhere the 2-year-old wasn't able to reach, so I went inside to retrieve it, justifying that I'd only be a small while. The way the house was set up was that the door was on the side of the house which led directly into the kitchen, which was separated from the living room by a half wall to the left. I remember going in and looking into the living room, and it just being a complete mess. I couldn't believe how dirty it was. Then out of the blue, the family moved. Usually there was some warning when a family left, but with this one, there wasn't. I eventually forgot about them, and for the most part continued on with my life. Fast forward to 2006 or 7, and I am in the 6th grade, when I noticed the niece at my middle school, but she doesn't remember me. Fast forward again to September of 2008, it's orientation for my freshman year of high school. She's in one of my classes, so our parents end up meeting and talking. That weekend, my mum sits me down and finally explains what happens. Apparently the husband had gotten in trouble with housing, so his family was kicked out. Well, they left the place an absolute pigsty, unsurprisingly, and the policy is that the housing office sends a cleaning crew and it comes out of a person's paycheck. Well, a cleaning lady reached up to see if anything was left on a shelf in the master bedroom closet and found something, a stack of pictures. When she looked in the pictures, they were all of the girls in my neighborhood and were incredibly inappropriate. Keep in mind that these girls are ranged in age from 5 to 10. Immediately, the base's police were called and he was arrested. NCIS ended up investigating, and because my house was connected to theirs, my dad was interviewed about what he knew. He was shown the pictures and asked to identify the girls, and if my sister and I had ever gone into the house. My mum told me that my dad told her that the pictures were the most depraved thing he'd ever seen, and that they were burnt into his memory for the rest of his life. It turned out all of my friends were his victims, including his own stepdaughter, and that he had been bribing them with toys and candy. My family and another one were the only two spared because my mum didn't allow me or my sister in the house, and the other family's daughter didn't fit into his age range. My mum explained that she had gotten an uneasy feeling from him and couldn't explain why. She even tried ignoring it because he was in the Navy. In the end, the couple got a divorce. The husband went to military prison, but has since been released, and the wife moved back to Canada with her daughter, and left her son with her former brother-in-law to raise. My husband Ted is in the military. We have generally lived on base in every station that we've been to, because the surrounding towns can be very crime-ridden and sketchy, and with my husband gone most of the time, the extra security is appreciated. I work from home due to us moving so often, so one afternoon I was taking a break. I had made a bite to eat and was snuggling up on the couch with the dog. That's when I heard the sliding glass door open. It was so nonchalant I thought it was Ted. I saw my cat run from the kitchen and a shadow standing near the door, entering it. I thought maybe he had come back for something, so I called out for him and was like, "What are you doing home? Did you forget something?" But there was no answer. This is where I just got an eerie feeling. After I asked what he was doing here, I saw the shadow move and heard the click on the sliding door lock. From there, he walked to the laundry room and shut the door. I still had received no response, so I'm sitting on the couch scared out of my mind, and I call my husband hoping to hear his phone in the laundry room. I don't hear a ring, but he answers, and I asked him why he came home, and he didn't answer me and says, "That wasn't me. Grab the dog and get into your car." After getting off the phone with Ted, I grabbed the dog and run to my car. From there I called the military police. Waiting for them was probably the longest 20 minutes of my life. When they got there, they cleared the house and found no one. They asked me to make a statement, and even they were baffled that someone would try this on base. We still live here, and honestly I'm so scared that whoever this was might come back. I was in basic combat training at Jackson, pulling fire guard at night, and my buddy was dead asleep. So I was just going around making sure all the wall lockers were locked because of course everyone was asleep and in their beds, so I just sat at the drill sergeant desk. I have a direct view of the whole bay, including the doors to the bathroom. At one point the light for the bathroom turned on as their motion sensor lights, but no one came to my desk to sign the bathroom roster, so I went around to check all the bunks and everyone was still asleep. That's weird, I thought to myself. The lights turned off, but the doors didn't even open. Next thing I knew, I heard a massive slam of a wall locker in the far back, but those are unoccupied lockers because we had a small platoon. The lights turned back on, and the doors were still not moving. I just woke up the next shift and tucked myself in real tight under those scratchy woolen blankets. One of the creepiest things that happened to me was in Honnenfels. I went outside my contact truck to smoke. As soon as I stepped outside, the air felt heavier, and the smell of blood rot was in the air. Mind you, this was in the middle of winter and below freezing, so I didn't expect to smell rotting crap when it's in the negatives. When I was just outside, it felt wrong to be there. My anxiety was through the roof, like someone was watching me. I started looking into stories about skinwalkers and other cryptids after that, and I genuinely wonder what it was that was making me feel that way out there in the middle of nowhere. If anyone has any ideas, I'd love to hear about it. I'm currently deployed in Iraq, and I've had a few weird things happen to me. There are a lot of dogs that run around on base that are quite friendly. Well, one night my buddy and I were on our gun sight and 2 dogs ran up and chilled with us. My buddy left to grab midnight food for us, and there was a small guard shack made from Connex. Behind it was a Hesco wall with a very small walk space behind it and the shack. The dogs started to be interested towards the shack and started growling and showing their teeth, looking in that direction. I looked around and no one else was on site, so I grabbed my rifle and called out if there was anyone and to identify, but there was no answer, and the dogs started pacing back and forth, still growing and watching the Connex. I had my rifle ready and slowly walked over there and checked behind, but there was nothing. The dogs just stopped and were just watching me now, so I started walking back to them, and the dogs' ears went back and they looked scared. Right when they did that, I heard rocks move like someone stepped on them, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had this feeling of dread and pure terror. I spun around really fast with my weapon raised, and all I saw was a blur of something going behind the Connex. I hopped away real fast, feeling sick and nervous, went back to my gun, and the dog stayed right next to me the whole time. I told my friend what happened, and he looked around but saw nothing. It was very quiet for the rest of that night. Oh, here's another story. One night I was in the guard tower with a battle buddy, just pulling another night shift with night vision goggles. Keeping watch outside the walls is necessary, and sometimes we'll see animals run along the tree line that's a short ways across, maybe the width of a football field. My battle pointed out a person sneaking through the trees, and we called it to our higher-ups. Then the guy walks out, just stares at us for a hot minute, but what freaked us out was that he looked like one of those old Indian chieftains, if that makes sense, with a leather poncho over his shoulders and this animal skull that he was wearing like a hat, and just a stick. I couldn't see his face since the skull covered it, but it felt like we were on one of those weird video game scenes, and it felt like time slowed down. He backed off into the woods, and in the morning some security guys went out to the woods to check in case maybe it was a setup for an attack, but we found nothing. No footprints, no brush, and no broken branches. It was very unsettling, and they thought we just imagined it, but my bud and I knew what we saw. It was definitely real. This story happened to my father. He was a career Air Force air traffic controller, TRACON, RAPCON, all that stuff. Made Chief Master Sergeant, 24 years served. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, hard but fair, and I never in all my life knew him to exaggerate a story or weave a tall tale. We were on a trip together a few years after he retired, and I had Coast to Coast AM, the Paranormal Alien radio show. He tells me that while he was on duty, either March, AFB, or Edwards, I can't remember as this was a while ago, he had something crazy fast on the scopes doing all kinds of things that shouldn't be physically possible, that they cross-verified with other units as not being equipment failure or an anomaly. The CCTLR and OIC pretty much tells them that nothing happened, they didn't see anything, and to forget it if they valued their careers. As a side note, he was involved in the testing of the SR-71 stealth fighter and stealth bombers. He spoke about that at length when the aircraft was declassified, and even brought some models that the Lockheed and North Grumman guys used to give out to the airmen and stuff as promotional items. He was pretty clear in telling me that this was not that. He said he was pretty sure it was a UFO. I don't know what to believe about it, and I'm not really into that subculture, but I know my dad, and he was clearly at a loss to explain what it was that he witnessed that night. We had been in Poland for almost 5 months. There were 5 people to a room. I walked into my room, and out of my buddy's jack shack I saw something, what I thought was my buddy, move over to another person, and I saw the sheet move and everything. I walked back to talk to him, but no one was in the jack shack. I checked everyone else and there wasn't anyone in the room. I turned to leave, and as I grabbed the handle, someone opened it. It was one of my roommates. I told him what happened, and we both kind of just crapped ourselves and looked around the room again, confirming no one was in there. I wish I had some answers. In 2017, the project both my best friend and I had fell flat on its face, and this led to a lot of stress for both of us, and many slanderous accusations which mentally drained us. I was going through a nasty breakup from my vile, mentally and emotionally abusive ex, when out of the blue I got a phone call from my bestie. My bestie had just signed paperwork to secure one of the last few World War I warships from scrap. The vessel in question was once known as HMS Sassafrage, built in 1917, and launched in early 1918 as a Q-ship. She was built to look like a cargo ship to lure German U-boaters when they surfaced, and would either fire or ram at speed to sink them. In 1922, she was renamed HMS President and became a training ship for the Royal Navy Reserve until demobbed. Fast forward a few years and we entered the commercial dockyard to see a very sad and forlorn looking ship with what looked like a shed on top covered in pigeon poo. From day one, we were introduced to her ghostly crew. Day and night you'd hear footsteps, talking, and strange mechanical noises. One afternoon I was searching on B-deck for an extension lead. Each cabin was full of old offices and looked eerie, like the staff had just got up and left. I found a lead right under a row of desks, so using my combat skills I did a combat crawl under them, and just as I go to get the lead I hear footsteps on the wooden floor. I assumed it was my bestie coming down to check on me, so I shouted out, "Hey, Lisa, I found one." But there was no response. "Lisa?" No response. Then I saw a pair of old World War II style naval bell-bottoms walk past the door. I crapped myself and jumped up in a panic, but forgot I was still under a desk until I hit my head and saw stars. I rushed up the stairs to check A-deck and ran straight into the office, gibbering, and asked Lisa if she had just been downstairs. The response I got from her made sure we didn't stay late that night. On another occasion we were on B-deck again, working away clearing one of the rooms, when we both heard very loud and pronounced footsteps. It was that loud that you could make out the strides. We stopped and looked at each other. "We aren't alone in here, are we?" I asked. Lisa replied with, "It's probably a pigeon." "A pigeon in hobnail boots," I reply. Then one night I got a phone call from security, and I had to go check the ship after work. I got on the vessel around 10 PM and found a leak from rainwater, so off I went, torch in hand, to find a mop and bucket. It was laborious work, so I took my phone out and began playing music. There was an odd sensation that I wasn't alone, and each 10 minutes I kept stopping and looking into the darkness. I decided to concentrate on the job at hand. Then a Rammstein song came on. I heard a thud and stopped and looked around, thinking, "Oh, that's odd." I started getting into this song, and that's when I heard, "Oi!" Wow, that was even stranger. But I was just finishing the task I was doing when I heard an even louder, "Turn that crap off!" In a blind panic, I climbed up the emergency crew ladder and left the ship with the lights on. Clearly, someone wasn't happy that I was playing a German song. The worst night I had was when I stayed overnight with my sister. I had turned the TV off and climbed back into bed. The dock had let water out to cater for low tide, and the ship coming in blocked the natural moonlight out of the porthole windows in the room. It must have been around 3 a.m., and I was aware of movement in the room. In a semi-awake state, I could make out a shadow standing in the doorway, about 5'2" with a big coat on. My first thought was, crap, an intruder. This is nothing unusual, as we used to get urban explorers breaking in while it was empty. I adjusted my eyes and saw it was a woman. Is that Lisa? I went to ask her what she was doing there, but I found I couldn't speak or move. I tried as hard as possible to move, but couldn't. I tried to shout for help and scream at the shadow thing, but all that came out were muffled gargling sounds. It sounded like I'd suffered a stroke. I was dribbling and panic kicked in. Was I having a stroke? A seizure? Why couldn't I move? Then out of the blue I managed to spasm in my leg and booted the wall. I screamed in agony, which woke Lisa up. Needless to say, it wasn't her, and we didn't sleep much that night. We still work on the ship and hope to safeguard her for the future generations. We looked into the Naval Reserve, and over the years, many men who went to war and who trained there never returned. Even after the war, some of her residents died in service to the Crown. Some of these men died on the ill-fated Karatua, who was sunk by the Queen Mary. Maybe these people came back to stay with the ship they once enjoyed their life on. This is a story passed down by my grandfather, whose uncle served in the Western Desert due to the mass retreat in Tobruk. His name was Bill William Meekings. He was a bombardier in the Royal Artillery, which is their version of full corporal. Bill and a few others, including a couple of Royal Engineers sappers, were digging holes to place mines in to slow the German advance, when tragedy struck, where a young officer was killed by a German shell. The body was pulled into the shade to be loaded onto a truck back to town. Some hours later, and many mines buried, a line British truck, a Bedford OY, from one of the stragglers slowing the Germans' advance, hurried up to the minefield. They could see the wounded men in the rear of the vehicle, and the driver and co-driver talking to themselves out of the cab window. Then the Bedford revved its engine and drove into the minefield. They tried to get the driver's attention as they watched this line truck weave backwards and forwards, left and right, until the truck reached safety and parked next to theirs. Bill and the others rushed up to the truck and shouted, "What are you doing? You could have been killed." The driver said that it was fine, as a young officer with blonde hair came to the side and said to follow him across the minefield, and as long as they followed him, they'd make it across. Bill asked what the rank was. The driver replied, "One Spot Rupert," which were nicknames for lower-ranked officers. Bill then asked if they had blonde hair, and the driver said, "Yep, that was him." Bill stood aside and let the driver view the body. The driver was in shock. He gestured that he was the same soldier who had just led him through the minefield. He was then informed that he had been killed 8 hours ago. It would appear that the ghost helped navigate them through the minefield. Brave Great Uncle Bill died in 1983, 1 month before I was born. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. If of course you did, you can let me know in the usual way. I hope you're enjoying birthday week. Don't forget that we have even more fun tomorrow with some extra terrifying, scary stories. And we have the big conclusion on Saturday, the very same birthday day. Please tune in on that day, it's gonna be great. That's it from me though. Huge thanks as always to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. More links for further content on screen now, and hopefully see you tomorrow.